Hi guys, Sean here. Thanks for taking the time to view the presentation. You know, relationships are just key. So we're going to talk about some relationship tips. My wife and I, Tanya, attended a marriage enrichment seminar last night. So some of these ideas are fresh in my mind. And I wanted to share them with you, and we'll do a few more short videos to talk about some of the concepts that were discussed in this seminar. In the area of resiliency, relationships are absolutely critical. You know, relationships, if things are going well in that area, we get lots of energy, and we feel good, and we function better in almost every area of our lives. The research is clear on that. If our relationships are not great, then it deteriorates performance in many other areas as well. So this is a key area. So if you have any relationships where they're struggling a little bit, whether it's at work, at home, your teenagers, then you want to listen to this presentation. We've got some tips for you. So let's look at some of those strategies or tips that I learned. First of all, relationships, conflict, they kind of go together. And so unless you're perfect, you're going to be in conflict at some point in the relationships, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, like I said, with your teenagers or your children. So initially we'll view conflict as really negative, and we try to shy away from it. And the problem with that is that when we shy away from conflict, we bury it, we dig deep holes, we put the conflict in there. But you know what happens with conflict when we bury it? Exactly. It'll eventually come out. So you ever had an interaction with someone and you're talking about something, you don't think it's that big a deal, and all of a sudden the person just explodes right in front of you, and you're going, where did that come from? Well, where it came from was not the specific issue you're dealing with right now. It really came from maybe a number of issues over time, or some big issue that got just buried in that moment. It got triggered. So try not to bury those conflicts and pretend that it's not a big issue. Try to deal with them along the way. But in order to deal with them, we need some strategies to make us conscious about things that we may naturally fall into, patterns that we initiate that can ruin our ability to take conflict in that moment and make it productive and make our relationships actually better as we go through conflict. So when you think about conflict, sometimes we think about fire, destruction. It's a negative thing. But what I want you to do is think about conflict as actually creating a fire, but that fire sheds light. And that light helps to make the relationship better. We learn new things about each other, and in that we have a better relationship that's more productive over time and more satisfying. So the speakers talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as it relates to relationship. There's 4 key things that we often do when we're in the middle of conflict that make it worse and not better. It comes out of research done by academics at the University, I think it's Washington State University. And so they talked about these 4 horsemen. So let's take a look at them. And when I go through it, you might identify with one over the other. But to the extent that you can stop these things in their tracks from happening when you're in a relationship, you might be able to get through a very difficult discussion and actually learn something from it and make the relationship better. So the first one is criticism. It's very important that there's a way that we respond to criticism, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when we're criticizing someone, we're hurt about something, what you want to do is shy away from using the words like you always, you did this, why did you do this? So try not to direct it and personalize it at to the person by saying you. Try to say I. You know, when that happened, I felt the following. So always try to use the word I. Don't use the word you. You know, you always do so and so. So you've got something important to say. Try not to start with you. Try to phrase it in such a way that you're owning it. It's something that you've personalized. And when this happens, I feel the following. When this happens in the house, I wish it would be different this way. So make sure you're conscious of that when you're in a situation where you want to share some criticisms or helpful suggestions, and you're wondering how the person will take it. You might take it a little more effectively, a little better if you use the word I and you personalize it back to you. The second thing is when someone criticizes us, our natural reaction is to become defensive. We want to defend ourselves. Here's the reality, though. I mean, when we really think about it, if someone's criticizing us, in their world, based on their perception, whether we agree with it or not, they're either hurt or we've done something that they don't agree with, and in that moment we need to step back a little bit, kind of breathe a little bit, and say to ourselves, maybe there is a kernel of truth here. Maybe there's something that I can learn. Now, this person's not perfect, I'm not perfect, but they're hurt and they want to deal with an issue, or there's a conflict that they want to discuss. So rather than becoming defensive and arguing your position, step back a little bit and say, what can I learn? You know, there's all kinds of studies, and I think we've been exposed to the whole notion of paradigms or how we view the world. And often conflict happens because I view the world differently than the person beside me. We think we look at an object or an issue exactly the same way, but we don't. It's colored by our experiences, our relationships, our perceptions, all kinds of things. Even as men and women, we look at things often differently. We're wired differently in many ways. So again, step back, don't try to defend your position, see what you can learn from what's being discussed in that moment. The third thing is contempt. Probably one of the worst things you can do when you get into conflict or discussion is to show contempt. It really shows disrespect. It's one of the worst things that we can do in relationships. So contempt might be a rolling of the eyes, you know, some smirk or gesture they make that really shows that you don't take the person seriously, you don't respect them, you totally disagree with them, you're dismissive of their concerns. So if you want to shut down the value of conflict, just show some contempt. And sometimes we get into just bad habits. We don't even know we're showing contempt. You know, rolling of the eyes can happen very easily. We don't even know we're doing it. And so we need to be conscious of our facial expressions, our body language, and if it shows contempt, it just shuts down that communication in the middle of criticism. So remember what we want to do. In the midst of criticism, don't shut it down, give it some breathing space, allow it to develop, try to continue to be in conversation around it, even though it can be very emotional. If you show contempt, you shut it down right away. So that's the third horseman. The last one we'll talk about today is stonewalling. And man, that's something we do really, really well. If we get criticized, sometimes we just don't want to engage. We can feel the anger going up inside of us. And so the natural response might be just to shut down emotionally or to become passive aggressive. So again, that's not a great response. You don't want to stonewall. You don't want to become totally unemotional. You don't want to become distant emotionally. You want to engage. And in that moment, it's extremely tough. But fight that tendency to stonewall and just leave the room. Now, sometimes we may need to do that. If it's intense enough, we may need to leave, take a breather, but then come back and engage. Try not to say something you'd really, really regret afterwards, and if you need to leave the room in that moment, maybe you do that. But just be aware that stonewalling just makes it worse. And so you can have people get into disagreements, they get into stonewalling or passive-aggressive behaviors, and it can be days or weeks, and they're still in that relationship issue. There's conflict, it's not getting settled because one person's just become shut down emotionally. Now, if there's been conflict over a number of years, and if you've been violating the four horsemen of apocalypse for a long time, then likely the relationship is in a real tough state. So just by looking at these four horsemen, it's not going to solve the issues. And in fact, if you're in a new relationship, embracing these concepts and understanding them will be very, very helpful. If you're in a relationship that's been going on for a long time and you've been violating these horsemen, and now the relationship's in a really bad state, there'll be other tips and strategies we need to take a look at, and we'll talk about that in future videos. Hope you found the conversation helpful. If you want more information about Take Charge or Change, visit our website, www.takechargeorchange.com, and we've got some other helpful videos and resources there. Don't hesitate to contact us. If you're looking for a keynote speaker or want to look at how Take Charge or Change, TCC, can help your organization to become more resilient, more productive, more effective, we'd love to have that conversation. You take care.